welcome to the CodeFuse demonstration, results, reports and ROI features. First of all, we're going to log in as an administrator. In this video we're going to run through a few screens, including the scheduled test screen, the test results screen, report screen, and we're going to go through a number of the ROI or return on investment features within CodeFuse. So if we start with the schedule screen, it's worth noting that within CodeFuse, as you can see on other videos that we have, you can select a number of different tests. You can select a number of different data paths, so there may be a number of different data scenarios within a test. You can select a number of different browsers or platforms for you to run your tests on, and you can also run a number of different application configurations. So in this section you may want to run against your production environment and your staging environment, for instance, or a number of different test environments. So here there would be a number of different tests created, and when we schedule this would actually be called a test batch, which is quite important when we come to reviewing results, because although we're scheduling, we just press the schedule button here once, there would be a number of different tests at different layers and under different headers. Just to show you a very quick feature though, we will schedule a very short test, just one test against one browser. It's worth noting in CodeFuse that you can see your scheduled tests as a batch, as a suite of individual tests for a given browser, and you can then see that test actually progress using this progress bar here, or indeed delete it or delete the entire batch. So you can sit here and wait until that test completes, which will be picked up in a moment. But for the main part of this video, we want to show you the results screen. So in previous runs, you can see that we have different batches here of test results, and for each batch there could be one or more different suites. Individual tests are always put into a suite called individual tests, and you can see which browser that suite was run against. You can also drill down into the test itself and then into the individual step sets and take a look at the individual results of the steps. So this is where you could piece together different tests, put different step sets together, and it would run through these steps here. So you can get a description of how that step progressed. There's a difference here between the final result and the expected and actual. That's just used in case, as you can see in this example, if we can tell CodeFuse that we expect a step to fail. So if we expect that step to fail and it does fail, then the overall result is pass. But unfortunately, as you can see down here, this test encountered an error, so we expected it to pass, it errored, so we've actually got a final result of an error. And these statuses bubble up to the step set, so that shows an error, and the actual test suite, which shows an error, and then finally up to the batch, which also shows an error there. So there are a few features against the test. So for instance, you've got a copy button here, so if we click that, we'll just pull up a new notepad, and this will give you the time of the test name, the result, and the video URL. Now for the video, you can either download the video or you can show a video of the test running, which we can see here. Finally on this screen, it's worth pointing out the Share HTML button. So when I press that button, which is available on the results screen and some of the report screens as well, the system goes away and it's actually generating a publicly available report which you can share with colleagues or just refer to in the future yourself. And what this does is give you a complete expanded view of the entire test, the test screen that you can see here. So that's expanded all of the batches and all of the tests. What that does is put together all the ones that are visible on screen at the moment. So this URL here could be passed to perhaps one of your customers, for instance, and they can see your test results. It's also worth noting that in the maintenance tab there is a shared report screen where you can delete any shared reports that you no longer want. And as I said, that's available for reports as well as the results that we just looked at. Moving on to the reports, CodeFuse has a top level report here called the dashboard. Now this is showing a number of things at either a firm level, so this includes all of your different tests that have been run against your account, or we can just say that we want to see tests for the given application and configuration that you've selected. So you can see here an overall pass-fail error diagram. You can also see which browsers or platforms, browsers, operating systems are giving you most trouble in terms of failures, and also perhaps which environments as well, or configurations. So you may be able to see that most of your failures occurring on the staging environment, hopefully not your production environment. The other useful thing is we've got a system which we'll explain more about later in the video, about return on investment. So here we can see which are the best performing, which have the highest return on investment tests, and which have the worst return on investment. So what we're getting at here really is how much time has been spent creating and maintaining a test against how much time you have spent or have saved compared to running that test manually. So we'll come on to more detail about how that's done later on. Next up is the Batch Reports tab, which is actually it's most easily accessible through the Results tab, funnily enough, because you have this report icon here. So we can click on a given icon, a given batch, and what the batch report does is give you a breakdown for that specific batch. So for all the tests that you ran within that batch, you can see the errors here. It'll also show you any failures that occurred, the top pass-fail error statistics, and pass-fail error by applications and configurations, and the different platforms that you've run against. We've also got a section here for any tests that have been tagged with the manual keyword. So that tells CodeFuse that the system shouldn't run that test, and you can actually, if we had any manual tests, you can actually fill the details in manually here. For the automated tests, it gives you a complete breakdown of the results down again to the step level. This report can be shared. So the final report is the return on investment. This can be, you can select all the tests across the board, or you could select an individual test. Let's choose one with a little bit more data. And there's interesting statistics in here about the key one, obviously return on investment here, showing this is based on a number of minutes that you've spent creating and maintaining a test against the number of minutes that you've saved executing manually. And you can see some quite in-depth information here. There's also a break-even projection of how many more times this test needs to successfully run until you reach that break-even point, and then beyond that you're actually making a time saving on this test going forward. This is very useful because you can analyze tests. Some tests you could look at and say that's performing very well, Other tests you may think the return on investment isn't as high as I was expecting. Is there a way of altering that test so that it's more reliable, it doesn't need more maintenance? And finally, some tests don't lend themselves to automation, so it's probably easier to delete them and perhaps keep that test as a manual test. There may be an area of your application which is changing on a weekly basis quite substantially, and that test is always breaking and therefore needs a lot of maintenance. So it may be, under very certain circumstances, certain tests are not really viable for automation. But the question comes, how does CodeFuse compute this ROI calculation? So there's two screens really that we need to look at to understand that. Within the account screen, which is only accessible to administrators, we have a default values tab. So CodeFuse can track all of the actions that a user makes, be that creating a test, editing an object, editing a data item. And we have a number of different attributes here that there's some default estimates here, but you can also edit these estimates for your own situation. So here is a default estimate time to update a data item. So we've estimated that on average that's about, say, 15 minutes. I mean, in your instance, it could be smaller, it could be as short as, say, 2 minutes, or it could take a while to understand what that data item is and what the data value should be. So it may increase. But basically every action, every maintenance action that you take within CodeFuse, we track that behind the scenes and we can apply these default values to that. The other screen that we need to take note of is the test screen. So although they're hidden by default, if you want to make use of the return on investment calculations, you can show the return on investment calculations for every test and alter these as you see appropriate. So each test, when you create it, starts as a work in progress, so we don't track maintenance until it's flagged as complete, i.e. it's not a work in progress. That's because when you create this test, you can set an automated test creation time. So if a test took you half an hour, as is the default, you can then leave that 30 minutes there, take the work in progress off. We know that it took 30 minutes to create then, and we can then track the maintenance going forward. So there's a set creation time and an ever evolving maintenance time which we can track. There's a flag for, is this a manual test replacement? Certain tests within CodeFuse may be tests that you used to do manually but they're now automated, or is this actually now an additional test that you're running that is an enhancement on what you used to do manually? There's also a manual platform count, so this is the number of platforms that you want to run this test against. We need that to understand how many minutes, again, manually it would take you to run this test. And finally, there's an estimate here of the manual execution time for this test. So largely all of this, once you've set your default values, these are sort of set for you. The only thing you really need to do if you're happy with your default values is, once you've created a test, untick work in progress and set the actual test creation time. And that's when you can really start to see the benefits of our return on investment tab here. So this video has shown you the results reporting and return on investment reporting features of CodeFuse. We hope you've enjoyed it and found it very informative. Thank you.